Okay. It we should be live now. And I'm just gonna wait for the link to come up on my YouTube. But if anybody's watching immediately, I'll say welcome to the After Dark show. I'm Don Rogers. Um, Happy to be back. I'm gonna do the whole introduction again here, but if you don't know who this lady is, this is Penny Bradley. She is a lifelong experiencer and is going to tell us some amazing stuff, but we're just getting set up for the live right now. Uh, so I'm just waiting for my own stream to show up here so I can share it out. Oh dear. Thank you again for being on, Penny.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, there I
Uh,
am. Bradley, the whole introduction again here, but if you don't know, quiet. Sorry about that. I'm literally still running off of cell phones and tablets because you can't get internet where I live, which is craziness in itself. So yeah, like all of my production is done like basically from the hip and on cell phones and tablets.
well, I went through, I think, 3 internet providers before I finally ended up with Comcast. And
Really?
at least I'm on a wire. I'm not on Wi-Fi. And I'm paying for the top tier so that I can do recordings and my partner Lou can play his internet games while we're operating and
Yeah.
have no interference in the signal. So
That's good because like yeah, where I am, we had a guy come out and he was like, "Oh, I'm gonna set this up," and he comes in the house after like working on it for an hour, and he's like, "Oh, that won't work. I need different equipment," and he never came back. I've never
oh
gotten a phone call from him again. I've never gotten anything. Like, I don't know if he just didn't want to tell me I was effed, but he's like, yeah, I'll call you. We'll set up another appointment. Never heard back from them. They didn't bill us for the service call. Nothing. Like, I think we're in that location.
yeah, there are advantages to being in that location, but it's difficult running a podcast.
Yes.
Um, I was with one company that would shut me off 18 hours a day.
Oh,
Yeah.
Jesus.
And they were not maintaining their equipment, and they have since applied to the state of California to leave our area.
Really?
Uh, there was there was a hole in the wall group that were actually siphoning off of Comcast, and
Really?
and they were charging full price, and I might be turned off for 6 hours a day. I would be in the middle of a show and they would just suddenly go dead and stay dead for
Really?
hours. Um, and I finally got so frustrated that, okay, I dislike large corporations as a
Yeah.
general. And I really did not want to have to do this. But yeah, Comcast has been completely reliable. The only time they went out was when the whole area was out of power. And that's unfortunately, that's reality.
Yeah.
If there's no
I,
electricity, there's no internet.
yeah, I think that's fair.
So
Um,
they have actually delivered
yeah.
on the goods. So I wanted to give them a shout out for that.
That's awesome. Okay, so I've got everything shared out, and I will redo the intro again. Because
I'll
this
sit
one's
here.
where I'll cut it
I'll
for
sit here
audio.
quiet.
This is where I'll cut it for audio and whatnot. So welcome everybody to the After Dark show. We are live with my amazing guest who has been kind enough to come on the show. Is a lifelong experiencer, is about the best way I can explain it without her getting into her own words, which she gives a way better description, is Penny Bradley. And she's going to tell us today, she's basically going to recount her life because her story begins at about her base memory at about 4 years old. And I think that's probably because this is a new show, new listeners, the best place to really start off with your story because yours goes all the way back to 4 years old, right?
Um, I had regression hypnosis, and my personal story goes back to before I was even born.
I'd love to hear that.
Okay. Now this is recounted from my regression hypnosis that when my mom was pregnant, her doctor had been asked by national security people. We don't know exactly which agency, but they said it was national security. They wanted to know when mom got pregnant. And so her doctor reported that she was pregnant. And I wasn't very far along. And I was treated with the precursor to CRISPR. And you can find CRISPR online. It's CRISP in all caps and then a lowercase r at the end. And it's a technology that allows you to add DNA at specific points in the sequence. And I've had my DNA checked through Ancestry, and there are two chunks, discrete points that they put in gray because they can't identify what it is. Now, from the regression, so I do have physical 3D proof, okay, from the DNA test. But from the regression, it was reptilian DNA. And when I asked my subconscious which species, I was told I wasn't ready to know yet. But since then, I've had other memories come up where they said it was where the memories were that it was Alpha Drac. So it's not that my whole being is that, it's that I have two discrete chunks of their DNA inserted to give me extra psionic abilities. And
Um,
this was a common experience for people in my generation.
that's really interesting because my former co-host on our other show was my hypnotherapist, and we discovered something very similar because I was a high risk birth and a very similar memory came back to me. I was actually born with a tail, right? They
Wow.
they cut it off before the age of maturity, but I was actually born with a nub of a tail growing out of my spine because they said it had split in utero, but it looked natural, right? They cut it off because they said it might paralyze me. But I had a very, very similar memory come up in a regression. So I completely uh,
Oh.
believe because I saw the same thing in my own regression.
Now I've done okay, I listened to Max Spears, you know, because he had some things in common with me, and he was a big name in our community when I was first figuring things out. So I listened to a lot of his interviews, and he talked about that all of us in these programs are descended from the Merovingians. They were the Frankish kings who beat Rome and took over Gaul, and, or at least the parts of it that today are called Belgium and the Netherlands and northern France. This was where their stomping grounds was. And they claimed descent from a sea monster. And if you go back far enough, you will find that the daughter of Jesus married into them. Yeah, so they're Grail line. But this entire bloodline was an Anunnaki hybrid line. So that's what these agencies are looking for, is that Anunnaki DNA. So I started off, I would have been that to begin with, because 3 of my 4 grandparents were Merovingian descent. So that's what I would have been had they not messed with me. I would have had abilities, but not to the extent that I do. And I would not have been a navigator on a ship. So it's the Alpha Drac sections that make me able to do this. This is not something that most people can do. I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else. I'm just saying I'm different. It's like some people have blue eyes, some people have brown. It doesn't mean one is better than the other. So, it's just I have these abilities that most other people don't, and that's it. And I only have them because they messed with my mother while she was pregnant with me. So that's where my story starts. Now, I have some photos of myself as a toddler, about
Okay.
not quite 2 years old, and you can see this look in my eyes, like far away, and things are not really making sense to me. And so I was having issues before they took me. Now, when they took me, I've had people tell me it was ET that did it. No, it was humans. They were men, regular, normal army guys. They may not have been army, but they were wearing green fatigues. And I was 4, so I don't remember whatever markings they had. So they were army men, army type men, soldiers in green fatigues, and they were driving a green Korean War style Jeep. That's what, CJ3 or 4, something
Yeah.
like that. So that they had several children in the back seat. They had used something to make my entire family stay asleep. My dad was a really light sleeper, so if they hadn't used some technology, he would have woke up. Okay, they came in, got me out of my bed, and took me, and nobody woke up. And Mama had made me pajamas. They were homemade pajamas, cotton, little flowers on them. And it's interesting to note that when I came back, they were on inside out. Mama has mentioned that. So we drove cross country because this was in Tulare County, California, smack in the middle. It was just absolutely rural land, just farm people out there. And if you know the area, it was like halfway between Porterville and Tulare. So you can look on a map and find it. It's just out there in the middle of nowhere. And we were on a dairy. And because my father had a nasty temper and would get in fights with the boss and we'd have to move, we lived in one of those silver colored trailer houses that you could just pop it on the back of the car and take it with you.
Yeah.
And that's how we lived. And I was the oldest of eventually 5 children. But at the time, there were 2 of us, me and my sister Gwen. My brother Robert was born after this. I have no reason to believe that they weren't manipulated as well. We were all 10-month pregnancies instead of 9. And that's consistent with reptilian DNA. And we all have small defects. I was born with hammer toes. And the middle bone in my feet uh, the central metatarsal is the proper term for it, is about almost a centimeter too long on both feet. So it means I waddle instead of walk properly. And that's caused me problems my whole life. But that's an effect of reptilians don't have human type feet, they have bird type feet. So that's a side effect. There are some folks in the community that have reptilian feet instead of human. This is something out there, just like you were born with a tail. Draco
Yeah.
had a tail. I'm surprised we're not hearing about people with vestigial wings, because Draco also have wings. So there's a lot of things that could happen with this CRISPR tech. And so we get in this Jeep, there are already other children in it, and we drive south and pick up on Route 66. This was in 1959, so there were no other cross-country roads at the time. So we went Route 66. Part of the time we drove through tunnels. I think that was when they were building the maglev system, but I don't have details about that. I know we drove Route 66 part of the way, but only at night. The only thing that makes sense is they didn't want the public to notice children in an Army Jeep. But it took us almost a week, and we got to Langley Air Force Base in Virginia. We did not go into, the building is on the base, but it's not a base property. Does that make sense? The base is a
It does.
the base has been there for centuries, and this was one of the older buildings. And this was the year they were building the new CIA building. Well, that's how it was dedicated in 1960. So it was before that was open to anything. And whatever this building was, it had several stories underground. And we were taken to one of those underground, and it was set up like a hospital. Everything was white tiles on the walls, white tiles on the floor. Everything that could be painted white was painted white, even the metal. I had a child-sized cot in my single-person room. The only window was in the door, and it was one of those that you peek through to see what people are doing. So I had a cot with one blanket and one sheet and no pillow. And I had a child-sized toilet and a child-sized sink, no mirrors. And the first thing they did was shave my head. Well, I had short, wispy hair to begin with. You know, my hair is still thin today, but they shaved it down just like they did to Eleven in Stranger Things. There were so many, you know how in there everything was white, and they
Yeah.
had they had orderlies in white, and they had the doctor in white, and they had everything was white. And basically, we were kept in our cell unless they wanted to do something with us. Sometimes they would take us and put us in an observation room and assign tasks. Things like crushing cans and killing small animals, and other times it would be traveling interdimensionally. They would set us up in situations where we had to kill each other. But first they did mind fracture. Now I'm going to spare you the details of that, mostly because I don't want to remember them. and I have to think about it. So,
Can I ask you a quick question? Can I ask a quick question? It's actually from the chat, and I'm going to do my best not to butcher this. Um, do you have an opinion on central heterochromia? I'm not familiar myself.
central heterochromia is where fraternal twins absorb each other. And there would have been two separate DNA people, but they have merged into one individual. David Bowie was one of those. That's why he had one brown eye and one blue. It happens more often than people think. It's unusual, but not a freak situation. And it's been a problem in some custody cases because they'll draw blood and it will have one DNA, but the reproductive organs will have another because they were merged separate people. So, it's been a problem with custody battles. So
Okay.
it's
I didn't know what that was, so good question.
yeah, that's what that is. We don't have any more of that in the SSP than the regular population. I think they preferred us to be controlled DNA so that they knew what they were dealing with. But yeah, there's some folks out there that have it and were used in programs. And some that weren't used in programs, but it's not that unusual. I think it's 1% of the population, so it's something that happens. Reproduction is a weird thing. Things happen. You can have two individuals merge if they've implanted too closely together. You can have one twin die and the other one make it. You can have all of them die. There are
Me
lots of
and me and
anomalies.
Audrey Walters were talking about fetus in fetu, where the female twin will actually absorb the other twin in utero and be
That's what
born pregnant. Like
that one I've not heard of. So
it happened. You can look it up. It was
I won't rule it out,
March.
but I hadn't heard of that one.
Yeah, I actually looked it up because I thought Audrey was on a tangent, so I was like, okay, I'm going to check this out. It happened in Colombia in 2019. A woman was pregnant with twins, and the one fetus absorbed the other in utero, and actually came out with a small fetus inside of the baby.
Wow.
Of course, it had massive deformities, but it
Yeah.
actually happened.
Okay.
Sorry, I
I
didn't mean to go off
I
on a tangent there.
I had one of those twins that disappeared. Um, that was something else that came up in the regression hypnosis. So I had been haunted by her. She had a death wish. And I don't know why she stayed with me unless I absorbed part of her. I mean, that's the only explanation that makes sense, tying her here. We did a funeral service for her, and I've been more at peace since. So I don't think she's entirely gone, but she's not as unhappy as she was. But yeah, weird things. There's all kinds of weird things that can happen. There's twins in my family, so it's not unexpected. Um, a lot of people with Anunnaki blood have twins in their family. A lot of people with Atlantean blood have twins in their family. So those are the two types. So where was I going with this? We went to Langley, and their job was to create a 13 by 13 by 13 cubic hierarchical array, just like in a computer, only it was altars. So the top 13 square were like the originals, and then all of them were split 13 times. So the ones off of them would have whatever training the top ones had. Plus, they could be trained individually. And it took about a year and a half. And they did it the old-fashioned way in my time. Nowadays, I understand they use virtual reality on the kids now. In my time, they actually raped us. And I have horrific flashbacks of being nailed inside the wall. That was worse for me than the sexual parts. It was, what they did to us was really harsh. They had a Mantid tech regeneration tank. So if they killed us, they could bring us back from the dead. So one of the things we were taught was death was not an option. They would just regenerate you and make you do it anyway. So that was a way to reinforce compliance, following orders. It has been a struggle for me to stand up and go forward, to come forward and talk about this stuff, because the compliance was so deeply ingrained in me. And I had church mouse programming. And when my memories were activated, that fell away. But before that, I had embraced servanthood. I thought I was nobody and that nothing I did mattered. And that was kind of freeing because there was no longer any guilt for what I did because it didn't affect anyone. And then suddenly I found out that I'd been in these programs and I had to figure out exactly what happened because my memories were in German. Okay, at Langley, after they had the required number of altars, so this was fall of 61 through the winter into spring of 62. So they sent me to Montauk. They sent all of the super soldiers and SSP that survived mine fracture to Montauk to see what we did in the chair. So this was testing what our abilities were there. And after that testing, they would send us back to Langley to be trained, fine-tuned in what our abilities were. Now, mine that they discovered there was I could take physical objects into hyperspace with me. Okay, I was little. I was one of those kids, I was tiny until about 7th grade. And then I suddenly got big. So I was too small for my shoulders to reach the electrodes in the chair. Because there's electrodes in the back of the chair that connect you to it. It connects into your nervous system through those electrodes. And I was too small. And so they put me on a peach box, the old school
Yeah.
wooden peach box. They didn't even put a towel on it, keep me from getting splinters. They just put me
Oof.
on they just put me on the peach box inside the chair and strapped me in. Well, they kept me in a cage there. The cage was sometimes electrified. They fed me dog food. I was so hungry I didn't care what it was. But after being mind fractured at Langley and being abused at Montauk, 6-year-old me had had enough. And I was looking to run away. And they put me in this time tunnel. They said, don't look at the loops because they'll grab you and you'll end up where we can't find you. And 6-year-old me understood that as I can escape that way. Now they wanted me at the end of the tunnel, which was in the 1880s, somewhere in the Western United States, one of those classic general stores that's not painted and it's wooden, and it had a display of apples in front of it, and they wanted me to steal an apple because they were testing the butterfly effect to see if you change something there, would something here change? They were testing how much they could change things without changing now, or how things would change. And so I would get about halfway down the tunnel and there was a hole in the ceiling. It was a portal to another dimension. And I would get to that thing and focus on it, and I would take myself there. And because I was strapped into the chair, I took the chair with me. And the particular hole in the ceiling went to this other dimensional place. And when you're there, it feels just as physical as here. But I would go there. And these people were basically like we see orcs, except they were very civilized and they were brown instead of green. And they had made their houses like mud brick, and they didn't have whitewash, so they were brown houses with thatched roofs that had turned brown with time, and the streets were dirt but kept clean, and they wore, it was like brown homespun, but in a style similar to Victorian England. They were very polite. Uh, they spoke to me telepathically, not in, I heard it in English, but it wasn't, they weren't speaking English. And they would bring me out a blanket in those same brown homespun colors, and they would bring me out a mug of soup to warm me up. And about the time they'd gotten that far, the warrior Draco that was sent to collect me would show up. And he would grab the chair and he would grab me and we would go back. And he never hurt me, but he made it clear I was going, and the orc people never bothered him. They just, it was like, okay, we have a stranger, she's a child, and we know this guy's going to come after her. Yeah, so I didn't even bother begging them to hide me. I mean, what was the point? But the warrior Draco are a different species than the Alpha Dracs. The Alpha Dracs descended from dragons. The warrior Draco descended from oversized turtles. They are the reality that Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles are based on.
That's hilarious. My teenager's watching that right now.
Yeah, That's the real thing that they're based on. And they balk at being called Draco, but I don't remember what their species name is. So they are the second species in charge of the Draco Empire. And they really dislike the alphas. They have never been beaten by anyone but the alphas. And the alphas had a secret weapon. Their females are venomous. So if they were losing in traditional battle, they would send in the ladies, and the ladies would spew venom on them, and the turtle would die. So that was how they were conquered. So, and that's why the females are in charge in the Alpha Drac culture. They have a secret weapon. And I guess it's not so secret anymore.
That's actually really cool.
But yeah, this guy was assigned there. I know from others that there were still Draco associated with Montauk in the Phoenix Project and Phoenix Project Part 2. But then I don't know if they were the same group or not. You know, we're talking a long span of history here. You know, 20, 30, 40 years is a long time for a program like that. Things change over time. That's one of the things I want people to understand. We have people coming forward now who are in their 20s, and they were subjected to far different technologies than I was. So I was in a more primitive time where they were learning things and they were really, really harsh on us. There were 1,000 of us when I got to Langley. 5 years later, when the survivors were sent to Mars, there were only 20 of us. The rest were killed by the program.
My
This is
my own
one of the things that I really stress, because I'm not doing this to make money. I'm doing this to stop children being used for this. There's nothing we do
yeah,
out there that cannot be done by consenting adults.
e- exactly. Like my experiences are when I was 5 and 15. I
Mm.
got taken out of my room, much like yourself. Actually, they were in my head and walked me out of my house in my pajamas, took
Wow.
me somewhere, hooked me up to something, and basically apologized and filled my head full of information that practically made me retarded for like a year and a half.
Wow.
Then when I was 15, I was at my mom and stepdad's place. I went to sleep one night. I went to school for 5 years and then woke up the next day. So
Oh, shit.
there are many different variations on the way this shit, like some of the stuff you were describing about your school experiences with like fighting animals and each other. Totally get what you're talking about, because I woke up from 5 years of sleep in one night, and I actually left home shortly after because I felt like I was 20 years old from then on. Right?
Yeah.
They didn't reset something properly. I still felt like I had aged 5 years, but I was
Well,
gone one night.
Tony Rodriguez talks about that he changed through his, and that he came back and his dad kept asking, "Where's my son? I want my son back." You know, they do change us, and the public needs to understand we're different. This damages children, and then you have to live with this for the rest of your life. And some of us remember it the whole time, and others don't. They did a good job of mind blocking me, but I still had flashbacks even before the memories were activated. That was why I believed the memories, was because I'd had the flashbacks being nailed inside the wall. I had flashbacks as a child of being raped. I had flashbacks for having battles in space, things that I shouldn't have known about at the age I started having them. And when I finally told my parents, they thought I was reading too much sci-fi. I started being obsessed with UFOs when I was 10. You know, when they brought me back, it was the time travel had brought me back to before I was taken. And they got me back just after the other team left. But they left me on the front step instead of in my bed. My PJs were inside out, and I could no longer speak English because they had mind wiped me. And I was speaking German, and I didn't know my parents. And Mama was 20. She had dropped out of high school when she was 16 to marry my dad. No, she wasn't pregnant. And this was a lot more common in the 50s. The culture has changed tremendously since then. But in a lot of ways, she wasn't very sophisticated. We were part of a religious cult that was backwards in a lot of ways, anti-education in other ways. And she didn't believe in amnesia. So her solution to me not remembering her was to beat me. And then when I went to kindergarten a couple months later, I told the teacher that Martians had left me on the doorstep. And the teacher got a hold of my mom. And my mom beat me. And with every swat, she said, I gave birth to you. Nobody left you on the doorstep. You're not a foundling. And I'm like, when I got the full memories back, I talked to my mom. I said, you remember that day? And she started into that rant. I said, stop. I was abducted, and it was Martian humans, that brought me back. And I said, and you should have listened to me then. And she was like, the jaw dropped open, and she just did a full-blown panic. I mean, she was there. She knew that I had come back with my PJs inside out and that I couldn't understand her and I didn't recognize her. She knew that. She should have put two and two together when I tell the teacher that the Martians had left me. It should have matched up, but it didn't. So, there's a lot of crap going on in the world. And if they took 1,000 of us just to Langley in 1959, how many more have they taken, and where all have they stashed them? I've heard of people being taken to Inyo. I've heard of people being taken to White Sands. I've heard of people being taken. There's a place in Washington State that's near the Hanford Center, the one that leaked radiation everywhere. There are kids that were taken into places in Los Angeles, New York, all over the place, all over the country.
We had somebody mention in the chat, and I remember our Akeem just posted that there was like over 100 in Virginia last month. And they can
Easy.
slap me for talking about this if they want, but this is fucking concerning. Like, there's hundreds of children missing in one state in a month. Like, there's some serious shit going.
There are approximately 2 million children that disappear every year. Fucking disappear. These are the ones not given back to their parents. These are the ones that are dying in these programs or dying from other things. There's lots of things that are going on. There's the A blank for
Mhm.
trade. You know, those who are truthers will understand what that means. And
Yeah.
we hopefully won't get banned from YouTube for it. There's the
Yeah.
organ trade. There's the sex slave trade that Jeffrey Epstein was part of. And no, he didn't kill himself. Um, there's regular slavery in space. What they do is they take the kids basically off the street and they genetically test them. That's what they're doing now. If they have Anunnaki or Draco DNA, and approximately 20% of the population does, then they're taken for the SSP. If they don't and they're pretty, they go for the sex trade. If they're not pretty or if they're difficult to deal with, they go for the other issues.
Yeah.
But
Um, I've heard too that.
human trafficking is the biggest moneymaker in the entire galaxy
Yeah.
for humans. The human trade, drugs, weapons, gold. Those are the top four. And the human trade contributes to the drug trade.
I've heard also that that's related to, well, there's a theory going around that that's related to the tag and gate programs too, is they're
Yeah,
sniffing out certain kids for certain shit.
yeah.
So,
They're checking because the kids that are higher intelligence generally have Anunnaki DNA. Not being racist here, it's just a matter of fact. It doesn't mean that you're stupid if you're another group. It just
yeah.
means that those have been correlated. Um, the disease that my children have, the carriers are more intelligent than others. Um, it's just it's how the gene keeps surviving is because carriers are more intelligent, like sickle cell anemia. If it matches up with both parents, you have a baby that dies eventually. But those two parents are almost immune to malaria, and that's how the gene spreads. So that, you know, genes survive because they give you a benefit, not because they're necessarily good when you match them both up. So I'm not saying I'm better than anybody else. I've just been given different gifts than the normal.
Yeah.
And I think people need to really think about that because I'm not saying I'm better. I'm saying I've been fucked with. So I'm different. Different is not necessarily better.
Yeah.
So,
So, do you want to pick it up from Langley, I guess?
from
Because,
like
like, this has
I
been going on.
was okay, I left Langley in 1964. I was in a group of 20 kids. We had all survived Langley. We were taken to a building on Long Island under a bridge. I've seen photos of it. It's only like 4 or 5 stories tall. I recognized it as soon as I saw the photo. And I don't know where it is. I can't find it on Google, but I know it was on Long Island, New York. And you go inside the front and it's some kind of building that nobody cared. It was a bunch of half-grown kids in hospital PJs. because they didn't put us in real clothes. We were in hospital PJs. At least we had pants, but it was hospital PJs. And we were all shaved heads. Walking into this place, and we go inside the same elevator. It was that big. And we were told, huddle together in the center. And they poked, they had two panels on the wall. One was for it as a regular elevator, and the other one was as a jump gate. And they opened the panel for the jump gate. They pressed the button, and we went backwards. And as we went backwards, it formed an oval shape around. You know, that's what it was like. We were like in a oval bullet, almost like an egg thrown into this wormhole. And you could see the sides of the wormhole, and it was just like the time tunnel in Montauk. And in about 20 minutes, we were on Mars. But past the time tunnel part, you know, the wormhole, you could see space on the other side of it. The walls had been solid as an elevator, but they just melted away. And if you got out of that center zone, you would be sucked out into the tunnel, the wormhole. So yeah, it was important to stay in the middle. And this was functional in 1964. And that's why I don't worry about do we have a bubble over the earth? I don't, that's nonsense. We do have Van Allen radiation belts, but they're nothing to a wormhole. And you know, we'd go through the wormhole and we were there. And they transported equipment that way. They transported food that way. They transported all kinds of stuff over the years. And it went from this building in Long Island to Eris Prima on Mars. And you get out, when you get there, you have walls again. And the doors open and you come out, and there's this long desk like you'd expect to see at an airport. Only in those days it was wooden instead of what the crap they have now. And there was this cranky old woman that was there. And there was this big sign that said, Willkommen in Mars, in German. And this opened up on the German side of the base. Now, I understood later on that the other side of the base was Americans, CIA, mostly. And that's where Andy Basiago was. We were there at the same time, in the same base, but in different parts of it. And I don't remember an actual wall of separation, but I never interacted with the Americans. When I was there, I was completely under the control of the German militia. And they called themselves Marxische Heimschild, which in English is Martian Home Shield. That's what they called their militia. And I was with them for 25 years. The first 10 years, they just put me in school. They call it Schule. And they taught me their history. They taught me literature, including the Eddas. They taught me math and exoscience and exopolitics. And about the time I was 14, they started teaching self-defense, how to defend yourself from an extraterrestrial, or as they put it, a non-human. So out there, we call them all people. a person is someone with at least 500-word vocabulary, the ability to communicate, and the ability to protect their territory. Their shape is more or less irrelevant. And the Germans discourage fraternization with non-humans, especially of the sexual kind. They understand that there's always some curiosity, but they don't want hybrids formed. They want their population to be 100% Terran human. So I was considered a hybrid. So I was not allowed to be part of the civilian population ever. So I was only allowed to fraternize with other hybrids, and I was not allowed to have a child there. If I turned up pregnant, they would pop me into regen and erase the baby, because they did not want my genetics in their population. So in some ways, sometimes I would be a hero because I was a fierce warrior. But the bottom line was I was too dangerous to be allowed around civilians. So I was always an outsider everywhere. And I grew up on Mars first. So I understand the Germans there really well. They were nicer to me than any American had been up to that point. So I try to look at their good as well as their bad. And that's something most of us don't do, because American propaganda is they're just evil Nazis. They're not. They're humans. And just like other humans, they have a cultural bias, and they have good and bad qualities, and they have cultural blind spots.
Yeah.
Just like Americans do. And it's what, 50 million Americans have German ancestry. So if Americans are all good and Germans are all bad, how do you explain that?
That's very true.
Yeah. I have found that they have a cultural thing where if they find something that bothers you, they'll pick at you about it until you want to kill them.
Yeah.
So their nickname for me was Miskabert, which is an abortion that lived.
Oof.
And that was their name for me because it bothered me.
That's rude.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that they do. In regular life, you were okay until you crossed that cultural line that said I'm an equal, because I never was. I was always an American in their custody doing work that they didn't want to do or weren't able to do. And I had been modified so I could live among Draco, and they really didn't like Draco.
Mm.
The interspecies relationships had not gone well for the humans. Draco are carnivores, and they saw humans as a food source. And it would be like pigs being able to talk and expecting to be your equal when you've been eating pork and ham forever. It's been a big change for both species. The royals have decreed that humans are not to be eaten anymore, but there's a lot of folks out there that still do. So
That
at least the decree was that we were more useful as military rather than food. We've
well,
proved,
at least it's a step up in the universe.
um, why are the Germans so good at military? Because a lot of them, the land that they were in was so poor, they couldn't grow enough food to feed all of their children. And so the boys would literally be sold into mercenary service, and their wages would go home to take care of their families.
Oh wow.
That happened for almost 1,000 years. And so those people were really, really good at military service. And when they started uniting all of their little groups into one nation, the rest of Europe just basically shit themselves. They had been in a confederation before. It was called the Holy Roman Empire. And that's not even taught in American schools. And I think you really need to look at it because it had lasted from the time of the Merovingians. Charlemagne was the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. And it had lasted from him until Napoleon blew it apart. So that's something you need to check into. They had had a 1,000-year Reich as a confederacy, and then it was blown apart, and not even 100 years later, they're trying to rebuild, and suddenly Europe goes crazy. Well, the Rothschilds had funded Napoleon and funded the British, and both of them had wanted the Holy Roman Empire gone. So here they were trying to revive it, and of course they got into trouble with the people that didn't want it. But
Yeah, it's
the United,
interesting. I was just reading about that,
yeah, well,
how they had funded both sides.
they had funded both sides, and they do that in almost every war. They will fund both sides. No matter who wins, they win, and the loser will be indebted to them for however long it takes to pay them off, and they charge vig like the mafia does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes it's even breeding rights, but we won't talk about who.
yeah.
Um,
Well, I'll tell you, I think the mafia is more honorable.
yeah,
You know, they don't ask to be in your bedroom.
yeah.
So,
Um,
I see the
good,
Draco
good.
Empire basically as a mafia protection racket. A lot of people
We are
money.
coming. Yeah, we're coming up on about an hour, and we've barely scratched the surface. So I would absolutely love to have you back in a couple of weeks. I know you got the Full Disclosure Now conference coming up too. And
Yeah.
just before we get there, somebody in the audience asked, or in the chat, sorry, asked if you had thought that Arkeem Ra was your son from your days in the SSP, if there's any ties between you two.
Um, as a human on Earth, between 1976 and 1984, I miscarried 7 times. I have identified 5 of those children. I have not proven it with DNA tests. This was the time period when they were blaming the Grays and a hybrid program, but the truth was it was, I think it's called Project Moonbeam. Randy Kramer talks about it, where they were taking eggs and sperm from people that they wanted to blend, and they would take the babies out and put them in another mother and have them raised by other families. And yeah, it's a distinct possibility that he's one of mine. And he and I have talked about it. He balked at the time, but I heard in one of his interviews that he claimed me. So I'm not opposed to it. He's a good kid.
Yeah. And
If he's mine, I'm proud of him. Even if he's not mine, I'm still proud of him. And I have done DNA testing. He has done DNA testing. He's waiting on the results. So once he has the file, we can upload it to GEDmatch and find out. So
well, I gotta say, I've had both of you on this show, and you are both amazing survivors with just astounding testimony that always brings something up for myself or reminds me of something. So it's always great to talk to you guys. Um, so do you want to give everybody a quick rundown of what's going on at Full Disclosure and what you're going to be talking about and when that is?
okay, it's 15th through the 19th. We're going to be at the Serrata Inn in St. Pete, Florida. It's in the greater Tampa Bay area, right on the coast. I'm the keynote speaker. Probably the first UFO type conference that the keynote speaker is not an agent. I'm not being paid cash, but my expenses are being met. And that's been a source of controversy in the community. Sorry, guys, I wouldn't have been able to make it if they hadn't paid for my expenses. I'm on Social Security disability and I just don't have the money to do things. After the introductions, I'm the first speaker, and I'm speaking on declassified mind control technologies. And this is 3D real research that I'm doing. I'm using patents and release descriptions and textbooks for used by the people trained to do them. So these are all things that have been declassified, which means that they're obsolete. They've been replaced by something that works harder. So, but using declassified means I'm within the bounds of the security laws. So nobody's going to get in trouble for it. And I've been given a 2-hour slot, and my presentation will be about half of it, and I'm saving the rest of the time for questions. And I will be available the rest of the conference. We have evening panels at the dinner, and so I get to eat first and then be the entertainment. and and yeah, there are other people covering similar topics, and we've kind of coordinated so we overlap a little bit, but not a lot. So each will be standalone, but together you'll get a bigger picture of what's going on. I have a problem that I tend to give too much detail and people's eyes glaze over and their jaw drops open and they don't hear it. So it is going to be available on either CD or flash drive afterwards, and it will be live streamed for people who cannot come. I mean, come on, not everybody in the world can make it to Florida in the middle of July. So
Yeah.
I understand it's going to be $55 to watch the entire conference live stream. And if you can make it, come on out. And
Yeah.
I will be waiting about 6 months after the conference and then uploading my presentation to my Odyssey channel. I think that since they paid my expenses, that giving them 6 months to profit from it is fair. But I do want people who can't afford it to eventually get the information.
That's
I've been,
very fair.
yeah, I thought it was fair because they're putting out a lot of money to do this. And so I think that's fair. We are sort of sharing the copyright on it. So it's still mine, it's still my information, but they're basically licensed to use it as long as they want. So
Yeah.
that seems
Um,
to serve the best for both of us.
yeah.
But
And if people want to check out your,
we're going
oh,
to
go ahead.
have a lot of folks who are experiencers who have never been on a stage before. And we've got a lot of support people. And some of the support people are also experiencers. Some of them are not public with their experiences. So you're not going, if you're coming to this and you're looking for help, you're not going to be treated like you're crazy. Unless you start getting violent, and then you might have a problem. um, I've had people come to me for counseling and just go off the deep end. I'm sorry, it happens. So there are limits to everything. Um, I'm no longer doing counseling because it eventually wore on me. I didn't I didn't do psychic stuff. I didn't read the people. I didn't tell them what they were doing. I did compassionate listening and let them be heard. 95 or more percent of this community has never actually been heard. And it's very healing to have someone actually hear you. And I do keep those testimonies private. I'm entrusted with their secrets and I'm not going to tell. Now, the ones that have given me information and said share it, I will quote them and give them credit for it. But I'm not stealing their stories like others in our community have.
Mm.
So it's very important to me that I approach this ethically, because if I'm blowing the whistle on a government program for it being unethical, I have to watch what I'm doing in my real life too.
That's very fair.
But yeah, I'm really proud of this group. Um, we faced some hurdles at the beginning, and I think everybody there are good people. And it's kind of funny because Brian Singh, who has footed the bill so far, he's who will be reimbursed by the ticket money. Um, he asked me who my dream team were, and I gave him a list, and he added a couple to it, and I said okay, and we got most of them. So this is my dream team. So they're all good
Yeah.
people.
Oh, it's definitely something to keep an eye out for because you guys have like over 30 presenters, like two stages. The day of being thing is adjacent to it. Like if it was even a financial possibility, I'd be getting my visa and be down there too because it just sounds amazing.
Yeah,
And it's on the list for next year.
Yeah, I'm gonna be at the day of being. Um, I will have a swimsuit on, but I will also have a big gauze dress because I have a form of lupus where if I'm out in the sun, I turn red and then I get sick. And I don't want to be sick when I'm presenting, which is like the first day of the conference. So I'm going to be under a shade and not getting the suntan, and I'll be there and behave, and I may get in the water, but that's about it.
If people want to catch your podcast, are you still doing that, or
I had backed off for a while because there was a lot of controversy and I had trouble getting guests.
oh,
And I've mentioned this before, I have trouble looking at myself in the monitor. So I have a really hard time doing a solo. And I mean, I go out and
well,
I go out in a 60 and back, and they keep me at 25 the whole time I'm there. I don't think I look bad for 68, but to go from 25 to 68 overnight, it's a little bit of a shock.
I will say something to you right here. If you ever want somebody just to go on and shoot the shit with to talk about this, hit me up anytime.
Okay, I appreciate that.
I love our conversation.
Thank you. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
I was doing clip compilations for a while, and I had trouble keeping them short enough because there's just so much information out there. What I was doing was documenting ufology before this century. Okay, there's a lot of people out there that are documenting since the turn of the century. But there's very few people that are putting things together from before. And I even one of the episodes, I called it the dead witnesses, because everybody that was in there was dead except Laura Eisenhower, and I quoted her about her great grandfather. He's dead. She wasn't. But and Laura's going to be at the conference. Laura is a gifted astrologer and reader. Um, Whatever else her connection to ufology, she is a gifted astrologer. Matthew Mornian, I've hired him to do work with me. He's excellent. I would recommend him to anyone. Sean Bond, he's like family to me. Um, he doesn't talk about it very much, but he and I were in Time Corps together. We did some outlandish things that I don't even talk about because nobody would believe me. But when I asked Sean, I said, "Did we really do this?" and told him, and he says he broke down into tears. He told me, "I thought you were never going to remember." But yeah, he's like family. So yeah, that was the best response. I thought you were never going to remember.
That is a very, very cool response.
And
All right.
anytime I'm really in trouble, Sean will email me and say, "What's going on? What do you need?" And he's one of the people I can count on to always be there. He won't always
Good.
talk on air, but if I need help, he's always there. So love. Yeah,
All right. I guess we'll wrap it up there for this week, Penny, or this time, Penny. Oh my gosh,
this time.
you've put so much in my head. I'm stumbling over my words now. So I would absolutely love to thank you again for coming on. I want to thank everybody in the chat for their audience participation. Just a quick side note, my partner, my interdimensional exit buddy, Canadian Spinjet, is actually going to be getting her own website up. If you want to buy the things you see her making during her podcasts, it's going to be available for purchase at a reasonable price plus shipping to help with our costs of our podcasts. That blurb said, and I'm still working on that one. That blurb said, you can catch all of my stuff at March 4th Productions or on all audio streams under the Forbidden Knowledge Network. And thank you guys for watching and stopping by. And thank you, Penny.
Thank you for having me.
I think we're still live. I'm just going to cut it because I think we're still alive. It won't let me back